Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are going to resume our January 12th planning board meeting. Second on tonight's agenda, we've already started our comprehensive master plan review, but second on the agenda now is Jedlicka, Regina, 334 Austin Road, public hearing and resolution. Mike?
All my comments have been addressed.
Rich?
All comments have been addressed.
And Pat?
All the planning issues have been addressed, Mr. Chairman, and you have two resolutions before you this evening. A secret neg deck and a subdivision approval resolution.
Anyone from the public wish to be heard on this applicant?
I just have one question. Open development was approved and noted on the plat.
It was.
All the other conditions?
Well, they added.
Joel, use the microphone for the people on the, please.
Hello?
Yep.
Is that better? Yes, the town board had two conditions added on to the plat, which are over here. Excuse me, three conditions. One said that that school buses can't go up that existing driveway, and that it's up to the homeowners to maintain the driveway, and that there should be no further subdivision.
Perfect, thank you.
Did I hear anyone have a comment on this applicant? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, being there's no public comment, I'd like to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Joel.
Don't you have to pass the resolutions?
I'm sorry? Pat has a resolution.
Pat, does it matter which one goes first? Let's do the neg deck first.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, I'll offer the resolution of the Planning Board of the Town of Carmel, number 23-01, dated December 12th, 2023, tax map number 64.13-1-16, Jedlicka subdivision, seeker determination of significance, negative declaration.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Joel.
There's one more.
There's one more.
There's one more?
Yeah. Is it?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, I'll do it. I offer the final subdivision approval, resolution of the Planning Board of the Town of Carmel, number 23-02, December 12th, 2023, tax map number 64.13-1-16, Jedlicka subdivision.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel.
Good luck.
Good luck. Good luck. Thank you for all your follow-up there. You got a nice piece of property there.
Yes, thank you.
Next on the agenda for site plan review, John Chang, 716 Route 6, amended site plan. Mike, I believe you had some comments?
Yep, the applicant proposes to change the use of the second floor of the deli on the site from an office to a chapel and altar area and an office. Provide a floor layout of each floor, including all seating areas, dimensions, etc. Provide North Point scale, graphic scale. The architect uses pre-existing as is common for all zoning conformities. This is not a pre-existing building, so I don't know how anything could be pre-existing. Just give us a list of any variances that were granted or not granted on the site.
Yes, I've contacted.
Joel, we need the microphone for the people.
Yes, I contacted Dawn to get me all the variances.
Provide a parking calculation. The architect provided that 18 spaces are required. If you look at the second floor, my fire inspector went up there, he said there were over 50 seats, so that would be 19 parking spaces right there. So there's no way that you can only need 18 if there's 50 seats upstairs. The architect should review the building code before the project goes any further. Second floor assembly space for over 50 people may require a sprinkler. Holding tank, as the property is not in the water district, the second means of egress and alarm system throughout the entire building. Only the first floor has a fire system at this time. And is there an outdoor patio area on the site?
Is there an outdoor patio?
There used to be a picnic table and a patio. If there is, just show it.
Right now, it's not
Okay.
there. It's not
It used to
there
be there one time. I just,
Also, on the part, if you look at the chart, I did say that.
Joel?
I did say that we required 20 spaces, and we need a two-car variance. If you look at the zoning chart.
You need a lot more than 20.
Well, I'm not, now based on what you're saying, but we did obviously realize that we needed some.
Yeah, once you show us how many seats you have upstairs, then we can figure out the exact
So
number.
Mike, how is this playing, this is a business downstairs, a delicatessen operating now, how's the parking calculated with that business?
One parking spot for every 200 square feet.
Okay.
So once you put a church in, it's based on pew space or seating.
It's one for every 3 seats.
Correct, so if you have pews, you measure every X amount of inches. I don't have the number in my head, but it's
Okay.
16, 18 inches.
Something like that, but right now, there's just folding chairs.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The applicant involves legalizing a house of worship on the second floor, as Mike mentioned. Drawing S100 shows proposed features, plantings, mulch islands, railroad tie edges, new concrete curbs, etc. The applicant should provide details for these features along with the areas of disturbance associated with their installation. The applicant has provided a water and wastewater report, and it indicates that the water use will remain constant with the current rate. The New York City DEP will need to be notified and approve these wastewater flows. Based on what Mike was just saying, a 50-seat, how often is the church going to be used? 50 seats, is it 5 days a week? That may vary what goes on how the wastewater report is, so that might have to be refined as we move forward.
Thank you, Rich and Pat.
So, Rich and Mike touched on most of the issues. The building is dimensionally non-conforming in numerous ways, so like any non-conforming building, just give us the evidence that that's legally pre-existing and non-conforming.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I've requested all the variances.
Okay. The parking requirement, Mr. Chairman, as you indicated earlier, is cumulative for all the uses in the site. So Mike's point, Joel's already indicated he needs a variance. I think the variance will be larger than what he's indicated. But
Yes.
the parking tabulation needs to take into account all the uses in the building. Even if there's vacant space, you have to
Oh, yeah.
assign a
I
use to the
understand.
vacant
Yes.
space in the building. Mike mentioned that the parking requirement for the house of worship varies depending on that space, so that has to be clarified. The bigger issue relates to the operational characteristics of the church. So is it just Sunday morning? Is it do activities occur during the week? We have to understand
Basically,
that.
it's basically 2 days a week.
So it's likely we would condition the approval on that so that there's a limitation on what could happen in the facility. If it's something more than that, we'd need to know about that. So understanding how the facility is used is
Sure.
really critical to what's going on. Any other things being added, bells or something that generates noise associated with this facility as opposed to anything else, clarify that. And are you adding any additional signage to the building? That would need to be clarified as well. And this is a type 2 action, Mr. Chairman, so no seeker's not involved in this application.
Okay. Well,
Let me ask the board if they have any questions on this.
Rich, structurally, I drove by the building the other day, and I'm not sure what kind of conditions in structurally, but you keep mentioning potentially 50 people upstairs. Do we know the floor load can handle 50 people?
I cannot answer that question, for I am not a structural engineer, so I don't know that answer. So that would
Wouldn't
have to
that
be looked
something
at
that-
by a structural
Wouldn't that be
engineer.
something we would look into? I mean,
So
I
it's a
just-
fair point, Mr. Chairman. So number one, there's an occupancy load issue, but that doesn't relate to the structural characteristics of the building. So if there's a large occupancy in that space, it's fair to request Joel to provide some evidence that the structural capacity of the building.
I'm sure somewhere in the building department, you have a file from the original building when it was built, so we can check to see what the framing is.
There should be one, but again, we'd have to check
I
that.
think we need to verify that. I mean,
That's
it's
a very
it's
good
a
point.
little, it's Victoria Delicatessen, that's down
Yeah.
Route 6. It wasn't built, as far as I know, for 50 people upstairs. Maybe some coffee cups and plates and storage items.
What's it being used for now?
No, originally it was approved for offices up there, so
Was it ever used?
the public was up there.
What's up there now?
The church.
Is a church there now?
Yes.
So we were just improving
Oh.
it, making it bigger?
No.
What are we doing?
No. What happened was, I guess there was an inspection made, and it was realized that there was never any approval for the church up there, so that's why we're coming before you.
How long has
Oh.
it been a church?
It's
been
been there
5
for
years
about
that
4
it's
to
been a
5 years.
Oh, interesting.
I did not know that.
What days of the week are services?
They are there twice a week. The interesting thing is that they only have services at night when the deli is closed, so even though if you add the parking cumulatively, which you have to do to get the variance, but I think in actuality, the deli and the church will not cross paths as far as parking. But again, we have to go for the variances, as Mike said and Pat said, to add the cumulative for downstairs and upstairs, and we'll see what the total numbers come out.
So I would say that the impact that we mentioned earlier, the operational impact is a concern. The fact that this has been there for 4 years illegally and nobody knew about it suggests it's not such an impactful use.
Right.
We didn't know it was there. I think they've been below the radar for a while.
So, question then, so it's been a church for a while, so what are you looking to change now? Are we just looking now to
No,
make
to
it a legal
legalize it.
space?
Yeah,
That's-
because again, I believe the original approval, maybe Mike can confirm that, when the building was originally
Mm-hmm.
approved, I wasn't involved in that, but it was for the deli downstairs and offices upstairs.
Okay, yeah.
And, but I'm pretty sure the building's more than 5 years old, isn't it?
Yeah, the fire
Right.
inspector did an inspection and saw all the chairs and started asking questions, and that's how it came up.
Yeah.
We still thought it was an
Fire
office.
protection?
I'm sorry?
Does it, as it exists now, does it have proper fire protection?
Well, that's one, well, I believe, and Mike can confirm, I think Joe went out there and did he have any comments or corrections that had to be done?
He didn't have any issues with what was there, but he did not do a fire, whether or not it needs sprinklers or anything of that nature. No, he did
I
not do
think
that.
if
That's
I'm
why
gonna
we're
put
here
50
now.
people upstairs.
Absolutely.
How many egress staircases are there?
Right now, there's just the one staircase.
Well, the more, this needs a lot of work.
No doubt, the public safety of a place of public assembly is paramount concern for us, so that's issue number one here, to make sure
Okay.
that if that space is used this way, it's being used safely.
And there's all lavatory facilities up there as well?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
there's two bathrooms upstairs.
Probably not enough for the total occupancy, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I think I appreciate all the comments, and we'll obviously look into all those comments and come back to you with answers to all the questions.
So we do this right, and if it gets approved, the building will be in much better condition than what it is in today. Right.
Yep.
We'll bring up the conformance. Any other questions? I think the applicant has some work to do.
All right, thank you very much. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
There's a lot of things. Good calculations, which is a good point. Fire suppression, egress. Yeah. Big question mark. Question mark, question mark.
Okay, last but not least, on the application tonight, Pentagon Lake Cell Tower, Walton Drive. I will remind everybody that this is not a public hearing, but you're welcome to hear our comments. You'll have an opportunity for a public hearing down the line. Tonight, we're just here to listen to the applicant, hear from the applicant, and ask some questions. Mike, I believe you had some questions.
Yes, the applicant proposes a 140-foot monopole cell tower to an existing residential property off Kiora Boulevard, Walton Drive, and Maple Hill Drive in Mahopac. The actual tower is at the end of Walton Drive. The applicant made application to ZBA for the necessary variances, tower height, fence height, and distance to the nearest occupied structure. What is the width of the driveway? How many trips will be generated from the site? A balloon test was done February 20th of 2020. Will there be lighting on the site? Is all lighting oriented downward? Why are you proposing a monopole and not a monopine? I assume a monopine would blend with the trees a little bit better. I need a note on the plat that says if this ever becomes obsolete or not used, that it'll be taken down immediately. I gave you the wording in the actual, that's in the code. And provide a detail of the ID sign that'll be installed with the owner-operator contact information. It cannot exceed 6 square feet.
Thanks, Mike. Rich, I know you had several comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, after speaking with council there, my first comment, which I indicated that the applicant would need funding for escrow, that is not needed, so I just want to make that known to the applicant.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Is this microphone on? Oh, maybe I'm not speaking.
Yeah, there was just a cough as
You're talking
So-
too soft.
I have to, speaking with our counsel here, my first comment says the applicant would need to provide funding for escrow. That is struck, is not to be included as part of this, so I apologize for having that in my record. The proposed tower exceeds the maximum height permitted under 156-62, which is capped at 50 feet. The applicant must provide justification for exceeding the maximum height cap. This height, which is more than 50% of 50 feet, which would be 75 feet, and the applicant is proposing a 140-foot tower. The applicant proposes a tower location at a priority 5 site identified in our code. In accordance with 156-62, the applicant must provide an explanation of why a higher priority was not selected. Requirements for 156-62L must be met. Requirements set forth in 156-62 have not been provided. That's in section 0. Landscape plan must be provided, or a note should be put on the drawing, or planting should be verified by the town Carmel Wetlands Inspector. The overall disturbance for the project is unclear. The FAIS indicates 5,800 square feet. The October 2020 SWIP indicates 19,650 feet. The NOI has 21,780 feet, and sheet Z9 of the drawings provided has 20,540 feet. The areas just need to be clarified. Either way, the applicant's going to need to provide a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which just includes erosion and sediment control, but we just need to make sure that the right numbers are in there. The area disturbance must also include the utility trench up the entire length of the driveway. Town should be notified when construction commences. Conditions must be met and provided on the drawing with regards to the driveway with the slope, 6%, 15% from the roadway, 7%, 30 feet from the house, or in this case, the structure, and it must be paved if the slope exceeds 7%. Applicants should note that the paving details are 8-inch base, 3-inch binder, 2-inch top. Some additional info should be provided addressing the drainage from the proposed driveway and site. Parking on the site must be addressed. A lighting spill plan must be provided. Graphic representation of vehicle moving throughout the site should be provided to illustrate sufficient space exists to maneuver all types of vehicle that would be on the site. That might include some of our fire department. All turning radii should be provided. There might be a need for a performance bond and engineering fee if there are public improvements. That would include landscaping, that would include some of the erosion sediment control. And as Mike mentioned, the applicant must consider having a monopole designed to resemble a tree or a monopine. It also should be referred to the Mahopac Fire Department.
Thank you, Rich. And Pat?
So a few issues, Mr. Chairman. So we have a fairly extensive a series of regulations for wireless communication facilities, 156-62. There are really 3 threshold issues that exist within that ordinance. The first is we have a hierarchy of siting that Mike and Rich both spoke to. This site happens to be in one of the lower priorities, what's called a Category 5 priority. The applicant has submitted a report as to why they cannot be in one of the more preferable locations, so you have to review that and evaluate that. They did look at 5 other sites in the Category 5, 6 other sites in the Category 5 area to determine if those sites might be appropriate. They reviewed those sites. They reached out to see if those owners would be interested in lease agreements, and I think all of them declined. So the applicant has a fairly thorough response to why they wound up in Category 5. That's for you to review. The second issue relates to the radiation emission of a facility like this. They have submitted their radio frequency experts report, and I'd ask Mr. Gordioso to briefly explain where you are on the threshold with respect to that. That's a secondary threshold issue. And the third threshold issue is their facility service plan, meaning they have to demonstrate that there's a gap in service that requires this facility to be in this particular location. And again, they've submitted that information for you to evaluate and determine. The issue with respect to this particular application, again, as often is the case with these that we've seen in the past, it's a tall facility, it's 140 feet, they need a variance for this. Verizon is the carrier that would be located on this antenna that this company is building. They're also providing space for 3 other carriers that have not been identified at the moment. So they're building a taller facility in hopes of attracting those other tenants. Are those other tenants going to arrive at this facility? If they're not, it didn't have to be this tall. So Mr. Gordioso should speak to the necessity to provide those additional carriers on the tower. We have a provision with respect to the setback of that tower from nearby residences. It does not comply with that because of its height. It's double the height of the tower. If the height were lower, it would comply. As it stands now, it doesn't comply. As Mike indicated, they need a variance for that. So the height of the tower becomes an issue. The second issue relates to visual impacts. So the applicant, as Mike indicated, they did a balloon test in 2020. They did a crane test in 2022. They took photographs. They did visual impact assessments from 39 viewpoints around the community. The tower would be visible from 29 of those viewpoints, so a lot of locations. Seeing it is not necessarily a basis to deny an application. There are two issues that become more of a concern. It's visible from the county trailway, which is a designated scenic resource, and Tea Kettle Park. So the applicant has provided some visual assessments of those. A little difficult to make out what's going on, so if you could zero in on those two particular viewpoints with a little more detail for us, that would be helpful to understand it. Those are the two viewpoints that are of particular concern. The final piece relates to the construction pad that they need to create. So if you go to the end of the cul-de-sac, the site drops down fairly significantly, and this pad would be in the middle of a steeply sloping area. So it's a challenging construction site. They are removing a number of trees to accommodate that. There's significant grading associated with that, so the construction project of creating the pad is actually something that we have to look at fairly carefully. The amount of cut and fill that might be necessary for that. The tree removal in this case, I think it's about 40 trees. We're not talking about necessarily screening the equipment compound because it is separated significantly, but the replacement of trees, there's an ecological value to the trees that are being removed, so the potential to replace some of that as a mitigating measure is something we should talk about. Rich indicated the surface of the driveway and so forth, the fencing that would be around there. I don't think we got details about the generator. If you have a generator, the noise generation from the generator, we need to verify that that's going to be code compliant. Issues, as Mike indicated, like lighting in the compound and so forth. So those details need to be clarified as well with respect to that compound area itself. And finally, the issue of stealth treatment. So the proposal now is a brown tower of 140 feet. It's just a monopole. Is the tree treatment better? Is there a color that's better than brown? Is there some way to disguise the facility and use stealth treatments to mitigate the visual impact of the tower? So those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Pat. Good evening.
Good evening.
Why don't I turn it over to you first, because there's a lot of questions, and we'll come back with the board, so we're not repetitive.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Robert Gaudioso with the law firm of Snyder & Snyder, on behalf of both applicants, Verizon Wireless and Homeland Towers. So, I would like to go through some of the issues which the materials that we did submit that I think answers a lot of the questions. We're happy to continue the dialogue. But let me just first run through a little procedural history. We did file this application originally back on January 24th, 2020. At that time, we submitted a number of items, and I'd like to go through them just so you know what you have in your package, so you know where to look when I talk about certain things. So we submitted all the necessary forms. We submitted a structural certification from our engineer to confirm the tower would be built to meet all of the applicable federal and state standards for structural capacity. So there's no issue from a structural capacity standpoint. In addition, the tower would be designed to be able to support co-location, which is required by your code. So that's in your package. We submitted a wetland delineation report confirming that there were no impacts to either wetlands or wetland buffers, so we don't have that issue. We submitted the full environmental assessment form. As Pat mentioned, the radio frequency exposure issue always does come up. It's a federally preempted issue, provided we show compliance with the federal regulations. We hired a third-party company, Pinnacle Telecom. Again, that report is in your package.
In summary, because that question that comes up, I've seen the report, but can you just tell
Sure.
everyone how it came out? Was
Yep.
it close? Was it borderline? Was it, you know?
No, it wasn't close at all, actually. So what we did is we hired a third-party company. They apply a methodology that's approved by the FCC. So there's actually a methodology that they have to use, a calculation, a formulation that they use. They used a worst-case scenario, so they imagined that the facility would be operating 24 hours, maximum power, 7 days a week, which doesn't. They used a worst-case scenario that there would actually be 4 carriers, where we're only proposing 1 at this time. So they took a worst-case scenario. With that worst-case scenario, the calculation came out to be 2.42% of the allowable 100% limitation, meaning that it's 40 times below the federal standard. And as long as it meets the federal standard, it's federally preempted. So in summary, we used the proper methodology. We hired a third-party company. They looked at the potential emissions from the facility. They used 4 carriers as opposed to just the 1 that's being proposed, and it's still 40 times below the standard.
So if there were 4 carriers, how would that calculate?
It would be 40 times, it would be, with the 4 carriers, it would be 40 times below.
Oh, okay.
Was that report signed and sealed by an engineer?
No, it's prepared, number one, it's not required to be. There's no professional engineering requirement for that type of report, as long as you use the methodology required by the FCC. But it is signed by someone with experience in the field that, and the company has great experience in the field. So it's the Pinnacle report, it's in your package. We submitted a noise study, but I'll get back to that issue in a moment, because I know that's something that Pat touched on. We submitted an FAA opinion letter from our consultant confirming that there's no issue from an FAA standpoint. There's no lighting or FAA marking required on the tower. We submitted a co-location commitment letter from Homeland Towers. That's required by your code, that they would make this tower available for co-location in order to avoid the proliferation of additional towers, and that's specifically required by your code, and we submitted that certification. Back in 2020, we submitted the viewshed maps, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. We submitted a report from Dewberry Engineering, and even though this issue is really for the zoning board, I want to touch on it with you because I think it does cross over, at least on some of the issues that at least Rich covered. So the code requirement for the setback from the property line is the underlying setback, so that's not a problem. We meet that. The code requirement for the occupied residences is 2 times the height of the tower. So in this case, it would be 280 feet. We have approximately 174 feet. And what we did is we submitted a report with plans from our engineer showing the grade on the property. If I just may come around for a second to orient you. So when you come down Walton Drive, you come off the end of the cul-de-sac here, and you come in through the driveway, and then the equipment is here with the tower. And what we've shown, and I think it was alluded to by some of the comments, is that the slope drops off. So the closest residence is over here. So if we pushed the tower back onto the property, we would have to have a higher tower, and we would have to remove many more trees, and we would have to create a tremendous more amount of disturbance. And what we did in the report that's in your package from Dewberry Engineering, we showed a plan and we showed a table and we showed all the calculations of the area of disturbance in this location, the area of disturbance moving back a certain distance, and then an area of disturbance in a third location. We also calculated the number of trees that would be removed. And if you look at that table, you'll understand why we chose this location, even though it doesn't meet the setback. Now, the tower is still well further from the residence than required for any type of fall zone issue or any other type of issue. So we do meet all of those types of requirements. But we believe that on balance, this is the better location on the property. That is part of your package.
Excuse me, what did you say you were just shy of 2? You were 274? What was your setback?
So the setback that's required is 280. We have 174 feet, so we need a 106-foot variance. Now, just as an aside, and again, it's really for the zoning board, this application does come under the purview as a public utility facility, so the variance standard is not the typical standard, and also this facility is what's known as a personal wireless service facility, so federal law applies. So there's some various issues related to that. I believe Pat touched on the issue of the alternative sites and the priority list. We actually addressed that in 2 different reports. So in your packages, we have an alternative site analysis from Mr. Klaus Wimmer. And what the code has is it has a priority list. The first priority is existing towers in commercial zones. And what we showed is that there are some existing towers in the area, either Verizon's on them or they're located directly adjacent to them. And those towers in the town of Carmel tend to be right along Route 6. The second priority is in general other existing towers. We showed that as well. Third priority is commercial zones. We showed that the closest commercial zone is approximately 0.7 miles away, plus it's tremendously lower in ground elevation. So we looked at that property and we had our engineering department actually prepare an analysis on that, and I'll get to that in a moment. We also looked at, in this zone, are there better parcels to be on? And we reached out to numerous landlords. Either those properties weren't available or they didn't work from a radio frequency standpoint. And we documented all of that in Mr. Wimmer's report. And again, keeping in mind that this is a 66.7 acre parcel. So we were able to locate it on the backside of the parcel, adjacent to the 70-foot H-frame electric towers that are back in that area already. So we submitted all the requirements and a response to all the requirements regarding that section of the code, which is section 156-62I. There was, as you may or may not know, there was various litigation. The litigation was settled multiple times. That's what brings the application before your board. As part of that settlement, we agreed to that we had previously, prepared the visual test where we put the crane out at the location. We took the photographs, and as part of that settlement, we agreed to also provide the RF radio frequency report, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the visual renderings. So on December 8th, we submitted the following items. We submitted the RF justification report. And this is similar, you may have seen this before. And what we did is we looked at the analysis in many different ways, basically every way you could look at it. We provided what are known as propagation maps. That's a computer model that factors in where the existing coverage is and what the proposed coverage from the site would be. And that's an industry standard model. They prepare the propagation maps. You have all of those in your package. That's the report from PeerCon Engineering. That, the benefit of the propagation maps is that it shows over a wide area where the signal will be reliable and where it will not. We did something else, though. We also did a drive test, two types of drive tests, actually. We had a specially configured vehicle with drive test antenna and a computer, and we collected exactly what the signal is through various roads throughout the area. And we produced that data to you in that report as well. We also put the temporary crane out at the location. Now, we had to offset the crane slightly by about 125 feet, but we accounted for that in our analysis. And what we did with that crane is we put up a test transmitter, and we tested the signal at 140 feet, which is what we're proposing, and then 20-foot increments down. So we know what the signal would be at 140 feet, 120 feet, and 100 feet. And what the report from PeerCon shows is that there is a significant degradation in the amount of the gap area that would be covered at the lower heights, which is why we're asking for the 140-foot height. We also, as part of that analysis, we analyzed the gap area by square mileage, by number of residents based on the census blocks that are within that area, and we believe we've demonstrated that there is a significant gap, and that 140 feet, this would remedy that gap. Why are we not going higher? Very simply, going higher would not help us. There is a tremendous amount of topography in this area, both in Carmel and in the town of Somers. So going higher, we looked at, and it wouldn't increase the amount of coverage. Going lower would significantly decrease the amount of coverage. The height of 140 feet is necessary for Verizon Wireless, but we're still building the facility to support co-location below that. We also looked at how does the system operate now? So even if you don't believe the coverage maps or the drive test data, we actually looked at how the surrounding sites are operating now, and we provided all of the data on the drop calls and also the access failure rates. So what's the difference? A drop call is a drop call. You're driving along and your call drops. We also have access failure rates where the system, where you try and get onto the system and you can't get onto the system. That's an access failure. And what we showed is on the surrounding sites, we showed all of the different data for those surrounding sites regarding drop calls and access failures. So you have all of that data in your report. We looked at every frequency band that Verizon uses in the area. We looked at the multiple heights. We looked at all the surrounding sites. We updated the data from 2020, and it's all in that report. Next, what we did is we actually contacted both DEC and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regarding endangered and threatened species. There is really only one issue, and that's a bat issue. There are two different types of bats, but basically the way, when you read the letters, what it works out to be is that in order to not impact the bats, we have to only take down trees during a bat clearing restriction time frame, which is October 1st to March 31st. And as long as we do that, the bats are not roosting in the trees, and there's no impact on the bats. There's no other threatened or endangered species that would be potentially impacted. So we did submit both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service letters and the DEC letter. Going back to the visual resource evaluation. So again, we did the crane test. We took photographs from 39 locations. We provided all of those photographs. We provided the viewshed map. And what the viewshed map is, the viewshed map shows where the site could potentially be visible from, but not where it will be visible from. So for example, based on the estimated tree height, based on buildings, based on the topography, it shows in a blue color on two different types of maps where the facility would potentially be visible from. And then we send folks out in the field and they actually photo document that. And what the photo documentation shows is that very rarely is the facility peaking up above the ridgeline. Mostly, it's through screened vegetation. And what we proposed is both a brown monopole and a standard monopole. Now, we're happy to discuss the tree alternative, but we would have to know that that's something that the board was interested in. When you look at the photo renderings that we prepared, meaning that what we did is we had a computer animation rendering of what the tower, where it would be visible, shown in the actual photograph. So I encourage you to look at that first, and then we could have the discussion of what potential mitigation measures might be appropriate. The thing with the tree is that it does look like a tree, but it is an evergreen tree, and when you look at the photos, you'll see it's mostly deciduous trees in the area. So the evergreen tree may stand out more, particularly in the wintertime. But again, most of the photographs are through, even if it's deciduous trees, it's a fairly screened view. We submitted the stormwater pollution prevention plan. Normally, we would not be at that stage, but what happened with the original litigation is we were at the building permit stage. In order to go through that process, we had to do the full SWIP. We did the full SWIP. We engineered all the stormwater issues. We provided that to the town engineer. We submitted what's known as the MS4 acceptance form signed by the town engineer. So all of the stormwater issues have been addressed, and we'll continue to answer any questions that there are on that and make any minor adjustments that might be necessary. We referred this application to the New York State Historic Preservation Office through the Section 106 process, if you're familiar with that. SHPO confirmed that there are no direct or no indirect effects from this facility on historic resources, and we submitted that documentation to you in the record. As I mentioned, we do have a generator. We submitted a report from our engineer. We showed that, and we confirmed that the generator will only cycle for 30 minutes a week on a weekday between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Under your code, the standard is 65 decibels during that time frame, and we've shown that at the property line, without any type of screening or any type of vegetation, we'd be well below that at 52 decibels, and that's part of the materials you have. And finally, we have the site plan. I'll be happy to review, when I receive them, the town engineer and the building inspector and the town planner's comments, and if there are any additional notes or details that we have to change, we'll be happy to account for that on the revised plans. I think this application requires a special permit and site plan approval, so it requires a public hearing. I believe because it's within 500 feet of the county border, I believe it has to be referred to Westchester County. As I mentioned earlier, there are federal rules that do affect this. There's a 150-day shot clock, so we'd ask that the public hearing be set and the referrals be made. I know there was also a note that there has to be a referral to the fire district as well, so we have no opposition to that either. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, Mr. Chairman or board members.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
I have one question, several actually, but your materials, and I think you referred to it, said that you approached 6 other alternative Category 5 sites for possible location.
Correct.
And the owners did not want to take your offer. Were they offered the same economic terms? Can you put a little bit of color?
Sure. So it was actually 6. 5 either didn't respond, or when we spoke to them were uninterested, and that's actually detailed in the report. You'll see the actual letter that we sent, the certified mailing that we sent. Those are not higher priority locations. Let me stress that. All the higher priority locations either were not feasible from a technical standpoint, or just didn't exist.
Just for everyone else's benefit, can you just explain what higher priority is?
Sure. So the code has a priority list, 1 through 5. Well, I think it might be more than that off the top of my head. As part of the code, we have to submit a report to show why we can't go in a higher location. So one of the higher locations is on an existing tower in a commercial zone, on an existing tower along Route 6. So what we showed is we're already on those locations and we're already on Route 6. One of the next higher priorities is commercial versus residential. And again, we showed that the commercial zone's 0.7 miles away. It's too close to our existing sites on Route 6, and it's too far from where we need to cover. And in the report, we used the zoning map, and we showed where all of the sites are. We showed where all the existing towers are. We showed where all the zoning districts are. We showed where all the Verizon wireless facilities are. And when you look at it, you can see this site, as proposed, is right smack in the middle of an area where there's no other sites. So that's why. The sites you're referring to is, in addition to that, we wanted to make sure we canvassed the area, even though we had a willing landlord with a 66.7 acre property next to the power lines. We wanted to make sure that we canvassed the area and see if there was something that we weren't overlooking. And out of those 6, 5, the landlords weren't interested. And again, we detail that. But yes, the answer was...
Just so I understand, they weren't interested in discussing or weren't interested in the economics you were offering?
So when you look at the documentation, you'll see most didn't even respond. The one, I think, that we did have a discussion with, ultimately that site wasn't feasible from an RF standpoint. But go back and look, we actually submitted exactly what the details of that proposal, who we sent it to, certified mailers, and what the discussions happened and where it fell off.
So who owns this property currently today? There's 60-some odd acres of land.
Maple Hill Estates condominiums.
Oh, okay.
So I have a question. You know, one of the things that I think we're collectively concerned with is being a good neighbor. I'd like to understand a little bit more why you can't put this further back into the woods to minimize the impact on the houses that are right on Walton Drive.
Sure. So again, there is a report in the file that I encourage you to take a good hard look at. The summary of that is that there are wetlands down in this area. We have them all delineated on the plans. So if we were to go in this direction, closer to the power lines, and again, the power lines are generally in this location here. So they're already there. And then there are wetlands between the end of Walton Drive and that location. The next spot to go would be able to push it this way. And if we push it this way, we looked at 2 different alternatives. We looked at an alternative here, and we looked at an alternative here. And what we showed is what the height of the tower would have to be to make up for the loss in ground elevation, because the property drops off precipitously as you go in that direction. And what we did is we actually calculated the number of trees at alternative 1 and alternative 2, the amount of disturbance. Even where we are here, you can see the grading lines. We have to grade through this area. We would prefer to be closer to Walton Drive from a disturbance standpoint. But what we tried to find was a spot that would meet the underlying setbacks from the property line, that would be a fairly insignificant number of trees to be removed on such a large parcel, and an amount of grading that I think when you look at our stormwater pollution prevention plan makes sense. When you look at the report that we submitted from Dewberry, the amount of grading increases exponentially as you go back on that property. The amount of land disturbance increases exponentially. The amount of trees increases exponentially.
And the amount of cost to you?
Well, it's not a matter of cost to us. It's a matter of that we would literally be tearing up that entire back portion and taking out numerous trees that are providing some of the screening around the base of the facility, that are providing screening from distances for the tower itself. So look at that report. We submitted a map with it that...
I've looked at all the reports.
Okay.
I have. I can't say that I wholeheartedly agree with everything. I understand, well, let me just say, I've looked at everything, trust me.
Okay. And I think
I
that...
went to the site, I've
Sure.
walked the site, I've been there, I've done my homework.
Good.
So, I guess I go back to my original point. I'm just not convinced that it needs to go in that exact spot.
So let me just say this. I think that's an issue for the zoning board. So the setback variance is an issue for the zoning board.
Well, I'll differ with you on that, but I'm talking about it from a different perspective. The perspective of, again, being a good neighbor and coming into our community and trying to minimize the visual impact of your tower.
Well, I think quite frankly, when you look at the visuals from Walton Drive, there is not an impact from that. If we moved it back in the woods and chopped down hundreds of trees, that would create a greater impact, and I think we've documented that.
Well, I was there today, and I looked at from the perspective of the home at the end of Walden Drive, this thing is going to be right in their face.
So you're going to open up the door and walk out and look at this tower every day, as well as the house that's across the street. It's going to be visible from their property as well.
Yeah. Look, I'll say this to you. I think we've made our application. I think there's criteria under the code that have to be applied. I think we've addressed those criteria, and ultimately you'll make that decision. And if the criteria under the code is either we meet it or we don't, and then that will be the decision.
So your point is that you wouldn't be willing to consider another spot to revisit that?
Well, I think here's my point. I think my point is we've submitted the documentation, and if you tell me that there's another spot that you would approve and articulate to me why that's a better spot, then we're certainly happy to have that discussion.
Yeah, question too, and sometimes, it's, I know what you're saying about the code and it meets everything, but it's more than that, right? I mean, it's more than that. It's more than what the code says and what we're able to do. You've got people who are very concerned about what this looks like where they live. So that's a big, that's a big consideration. So my question to you is, if you were to go deeper into the woods, as you say, and it'd have to be a higher tower, how much higher?
So
And
if
I
you-
understand the grading and all, so
Sure,
how much
Sure, so
higher?
if you look at the report, what we did is we looked at, for the two different spots, there are two different ground elevations. So
Right.
we looked at one that I believe was about 170 some odd feet and one that was 198 feet. We stopped at 198 feet because that's where you start getting into FAA lighting and marking, and it becomes a whole different thing. So if you're talking about possibly a monopine tree design, anything over 140 feet is going to be well above the tree lines. Again, look at the visuals. When you see the visuals, where the pole is generally located, it's either just above the tree line or it's below the tree line. Now, when you go to that lower ground elevation, you are going to increase the height above the trees significantly more. So you may be thinking that you're pushing it back in the woods, but you're taking out a tremendous amount more woods from all three sides, all four sides, and you're increasing the height, the delta above the tree line. And if you went with a tree design, now you're talking about something that really will stick out, that will really have a significant visibility.
I think we also need to look at, I know you spoke about at 100 feet, you get this kind of coverage, at 120 feet, you get this, at 140. Personally, if I lived in that area, if I used my cell phone, I'd rather a little less coverage and lower the pole down to 120.
Well, I think
140.
I think with all due respect, I think that the federal rule is that if the carrier is being materially inhibited from providing its service, then that would be a prohibition of service, which is not allowed. So, and I think we've documented, again, if you go back and look at the PeerCon report, it's not a little less service, okay? It's a significant amount of less area and less people that are being covered. And that's documented to the person in the PeerCon report that you could take a look at.
I looked at the report, but
Yeah.
I'll go back and.
Go back and look at that.
Specifically,
We-
20 feet, it might make a big difference to the visibility to people.
Yeah, let me give you an example. Let me just give you an example. So, the number of people that would be covered by the 2100 megahertz spectrum, which is very important to us because that's where all those drop calls, that's the reason those drop calls are happening. It's 0.6 square miles, and it's 1,342 people. That's a significant gap by any standard.
That's the difference between the 20 feet there?
No, so that's the area that at 140 feet it would be covering. And when you go back and you look at the report, you'll see we actually document how that number starts to drop down significantly at those 20-foot increments, both the square mileage and the number of people that are being covered. So we think we've demonstrated that there's a need for the 140 feet. So again, when you combine it, when you look at it in totality, when you look at going further back in the woods, you're probably creating a much greater visibility because you're cutting down all those trees. You're creating a much taller tower, which the problem being is that when you go down the slope, the trees go down the slope with it. So the height of the trees go down. But now you're creating a tower that's much taller.
From the downhill view.
Exactly,
Not from the uphill view.
from the different
For
perspectives.
those who live on the uphill side, you're getting further
So-
away from their homes and you're not affecting the view. But as you move further down the hill.
I think it's both though, because I think because of the amount of tree removal and disturbance, it's creating a worse visual situation in both cases. And when you look at the renderings, talk about the 39 renderings that we did in the 29 locations, when you look at them, the places it's visible, it's the downward view because of the topography in this area. That's unusual. That is very unusual. Most of the time, like people say, like, why aren't you on top of the hill? And in fact, in the PeerCon report, it specifically says, like, it would be ideal to be on top of the hill, but the top of the hill is not available. Okay, the top of the hill is like inaccessible, unavailable, so forth and so on. Normally, you also don't want to be on the top of the hill because it creates too much interference. The service goes almost too far in some cases. In this case, and most codes say you don't want to be on top of the hill. You want to be on the side, the downslope of the hill, which is what we are. The strange part here, the topography part, is that most of the surrounding areas are looking down. It's almost like a valley.
Yeah, I was out there. So, years ago, when we met on other applicants here, we talked about, it had to be like 3 years or so ago, I guess, and we were saying, geez, 5G is coming, we're not gonna need these tall poles, we make sure we bond all these poles purposely so that if you pull up, you still have to, we have money to take them down. What's the update on 5G? Why aren't, 5G, in my mind, we didn't need these tall towers.
It's not
we needed
true.
Telephone poles.
It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. So
That's a misnomer then out there.
that's misinformation. So
Tell us about the 5G technology.
sure. So
What does it do
what
for us?
all 5G technology is, they're using the same frequency bands. Okay. It's creating the technology that 4G is LTE. That's not going to go out with 5G. So that's a misunderstanding most people have.
Yeah.
4G is the workhorse of the system. 5G is an overlay where they're using the same frequency bands. There's no magic to it.
So these towers will all be necessary for
Correct.
the next iteration?
Correct. They are, and they're being used now. So the carriers, so for example, T-Mobile is using 600 megahertz, which is just like Verizon's 700 megahertz, to do their 5G. I'd ask you, like, how would you even define 5G? So what 5G really means in sum and substance, faster download speeds, higher throughput, okay? But the 4G is what's carrying the calls. The 4G is what's carrying the basic data.
So you're saying, just to be clear, that 5G technology on telephone poles would not solve the gap coverage that you're trying to solve?
Absolutely. Now, are they putting antennas on telephone poles in New York City and some dense residential areas? Absolutely. They're putting 4G on those poles, and they will be putting 5G on those poles. There's such a density that they need the extra bandwidth. But this is not that type of area. This is a broad gap. As I mentioned before, it's just at 2100 megahertz, it's 0.6 square miles. It's a gap that at 700 megahertz is much bigger than that. So it's a tremendous gap area that has to be covered with towers, just like the other surrounding gap areas are. So just think about it. Think about the towers in the area. There's the tower at Heritage Hills up by the water tank, right smack in the middle of the condominium association. Okay, that's the one to the south in Somers. The one on Route 6, well, there's a couple. So let's talk about them. One is at the Greek Diner. It's the flagpole, right? But it doesn't have great holding capacity because it's a very old tower. It's very similar to the one that's right back out here. That's right within almost the fall zone of that multi-story residential building that's right there. Probably within the fall zone of this wall here and clearly within the fall zone of the DPW property and the buildings. Okay, so there's the flagpole at the Greek Diner. What's the other tower? Well, the other tower is the old Jerry Agliata Tower up on I believe it's Crest, 51 Crest, overlooking the lake. You can see it from everywhere. It's a big giant lattice tower. Okay, those are the towers that are covering the main parts of the area. The next one, heading over the border down Route 6 into Somers, there's the one behind the shopping center. Okay, then you start getting into Yorktown and Somers and those different towers. So the towers are necessary. Where are there not towers in the area? On the rooftops on Route 6, because that's where the density of the traffic is. So they have so much traffic, not just cars, but I mean phone traffic, that they have to have multiple sites. You want to have multiple sites, you want to have them be lower, because otherwise they cover too far and they can't handle the capacity, so that's why they're on the rooftops. And that's all in the report that we submitted, and you can see it. And even your code accounts for that. Your code includes being on Route 6 as a higher priority, but we've exhausted that. And those sites just can't handle the capacity of the people traveling through this area or the wide area of coverage.
Can we go back to the height for 1 second?
Sure.
Are you trying to achieve the same height as you go down the hill?
We have to.
So it'd be the same
Correct.
elevation, just further away? So
Correct.
it's a taller pole? So it's not taller? It's the
Taller
same
pole,
height?
same-
No, it's a
overall?
taller pole. So it's a,
Agreed. No,
yeah,
but
but
you
it's
said
the
something
same
different.
height above ground. So think about this. It's the same, the top of the pole is the same height AMSL. It's much higher AGL.
Correct.
And it's a much greater span above the tops of the trees. And that's where the visibility comes in.
At the point where it is, but not from where it would have been?
Correct.
It's still going to be the same height above the trees because it's the same
No,
height.
because the trees go down.
Agreed, but if you're sitting at your house and it was here,
No, when you look at the visual renderings, you'll see when the trees go down, it's just right now, it's tucked under the trees. Now it's going to be up above that from that perspective.
depending on where you're standing, correct?
Are there, understanding that this is mostly going to provide gap coverage to Westchester County residents, is there any alternative location in Westchester County that would serve the purpose?
So it's covering both. It's covering both Carmel and Town of Somers, absolutely. But no, there's no place in Westchester because there is a tower in Westchester, which is at Heritage Hills. That's what we're trying to basically provide coverage that connects into, and then connecting into going to the other side to Route 6.
So you mentioned there were other sites that you considered, but you didn't hear back from them, right?
There's other sites that we investigated.
And you didn't hear back from them, or?
5 of
they
them we
just-
didn't hear back from.
Okay. And did you-
4 we didn't hear back from them, 1 we heard back and
you
it
said that
didn't
was
work.
no good,
Yeah, it
yeah.
didn't
So
work,
the
yeah.
other 4 that you heard back from, did you pursue them any more than before we decided to come here?
No, because we actually found this site, which worked from a technical standpoint.
So you
So we
didn't-
were doing
don't-
all of that at the same time.
Right, so we don't know if those would have been just as good or better or not. 'cause
Well, we
haven't-
think this is a better site for 2 reasons. 1, it's a 66.7 acre property, and 2, it's next to the power lines. And we had a landlord that was willing to enter
Right,
into a lease
again,
agreement.
we've got residents who are very concerned about it.
I
so
think
we
we'd have
can't lose
residents
sight
that
of
would have the same
That's
concerns
it.
at that site because they have the same concerns at every tower site.
Yeah, understandable, we can't miss that, we can't forget that. As I said, we're meeting the codes and all the things that are legal, and the landlord said it's fine, but there's more considerations than that, that's all I'm saying.
I understand your point.
All right, I think we need to, you're scheduled for the zoning board the last Thursday.
26th.
Of the month, right?
Correct.
Rob, procedurally, you're going to go before the zoning board on the 26th. We'd like to have you back, I believe, on the 25th. are you going to be in a position to address some of the consultant's concerns at that meeting?
So I think that many of the concerns that I heard, and I haven't seen the memos, I think we've already answered. If there are details that need to be changed on the plans, I don't know if we can get that submitted in time, in less than 2 weeks, but we can certainly endeavor to do that. I think more importantly, because of the FCC shot clock, I think it needs to be referred to the county. I think it needs to go to the fire department. I think that was an important comment. And we think that there should be a public hearing, not on the 25th, obviously, but sometime maybe in February.
So to Joe's point, if we can satisfy the consultants and some questions asked here, and be back here on the 4th Wednesday of the month, the 5th Wednesday of the month is the zoning board, it's feasible that we can do a public hearing in February, I think. 'Cause I'd like to
Agreed.
hear the input from the community.
Would we have the renderings for the next meeting?
I'm sorry?
25th, the renderings?
You have them.
They
They're in
were
your
I
package.
just scrolled through the packet, I didn't see them, I saw the.
Yeah, they're in there. The visual analysis by Saratoga Associates.
But I think Pat's questions raised, no pun intended, gaps in your visual analysis.
So whether it's repackaging that information or representing it, those two viewpoints in particular.
Okay, do you know the viewpoint numbers off the top of your head, just so I make sure I have the right ones?
36 and 37, I think.
36 and 37?
And Rob, could you bring the renderings so the audience could see them for the public hearing?
Sure.
I think that'd be important. I think it's.
It might be, so we don't blow them up because it throws the scale off. But we can make a couple different we can take a couple copies that can be passed around.
Picture's worth 1,000
Yep,
words, right? I think
absolutely.
Okay. Are we closed on the color of this ground
So look,
compared to?
we could do any color.
Okay.
That's not a problem. What we can do, so I'll say this, pick any color you want, but I'll say this secondly. Let us propose 2 colors to you because we do this.
Yeah.
There's a pine cone brown and there's a thunder gray that are the 2 colors that we have found in our experience are the 2 best colors.
I'm not.
And if you think something else is better, we have no objection, but we'll present those 2 colors to you and
And on the
Explain why.
visuals,
That would be good.
on the visuals, could you show what the monopine would look like? Understanding your comment that it's going to be visible through the deciduous trees in the winter.
what I'll try and do is see if we can do some from the viewpoints that were of the biggest concern.
Yeah.
I know we're throwing a lot of questions at you. I think everyone on the board understands the shot clock. I do from past dealings with you. Can you just explain for the people on TV what a shot clock is?
Sure. So the FCC has said that, actually, let me take a step back. Congress has said that these applications may not be unreasonably delayed. And what the FCC has created and what the courts have agreed to is that a presumptively reasonable period of time is 150 days from the date we file it, which was December 8th. So we have 150 days to get through all our permitting. We also, as part of the settlement, agreed to give the town additional time for the building permit stage. So we're not going to count the building permit stage. We already carved that out. If at the end of the 150 days, then we have a choice. We could either mutually agree to extend it, or we could go to court. And if we're making progress, as you've seen in the past, we're willing to have that discussion to extend it, but we need to make that progress, and I appreciate you putting us on again so that we can move this along. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board, the consultants?
I just have one comment. Again, one of my comments in there talks about the priority list. That's been addressed, so again, you can strike that from my record. You'll respond back in your email or whatever comments back to me saying, we've addressed that already, I'm making that acknowledgement now.
Okay.
So you'll make it anyway in your comment letter back, but just so
Thank you.
you guys know.
And I can get those comments from Rose?
From
Thank you.
Rose. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We'll get it to you as soon as possible because she's not in tomorrow, and we're off on Monday. So I'll try to send them to you tomorrow.
I'd appreciate it.
No
Thank you.
problem.
Available on the town website.
I don't believe so. Okay.
Thank you for your time
Thank
this
you.
evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
That gray is a good idea. The gray color. see is great. This type of tree.
Okay, I know Rose
Because of the type of trees.
distributed, yeah, so we are done with that applicant. As you heard, there will be a public hearing where you'll be able to come and voice all your concerns.
Just to you guys, it's unofficial off the record. So I'm Rob Cavallaro, 49 Walton Drive. I've been there.
All right, I don't think it's a good idea to engage in a colloquy here outside of the public hearing. There'll be an opportunity.
You can email, but look, we're gonna have a meeting. We are gonna have the meeting, that's why I introduced the meeting saying that,
On the 26th, right?
25th.
25th.
Planning board on the-
sort of, planning board meets the second Thursday and the fourth Wednesday. The fourth Wednesday is gonna be another meeting similar to this. It will not be open to the public. We're gonna keep asking detailed questions and.
It'll be open to the public, it won't be a public hearing.
Right, it'll be open to the public, not a public hearing, just like tonight. The day after that, the zoning board is gonna have a meeting that Thursday, the fourth Thursday of the month. At
That will be a
time-
public hearing that night,
Yes, that's a public hearing in the zoning board?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the zoning board will likely open that to a public hearing that evening. So if you want to address the zoning board, that would be the opportunity to do it.
Okay, thank you.
That's a fourth,
You're approving the application then?
No, we're not even, we're nowhere near there.
Okay.
We have submitted in writing questions.
Again, this is not, if you have anything that you want to
And if you-
submit in writing, that should go to Rose Trombetta, but this colloquy back and forth is not, it's not the right
Because
time.
we could, yeah, and if you submitted comments to Rose, we have them. All right, so. It was distributed. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Rain? See the rain over there?
If you want to wait, I'll talk outside.
Yeah, we got a meeting. Yeah, and you're gonna have plenty of time to ask questions. Yeah, yes. No. All right, look, we gotta get back to the meeting here. Excuse me, I'm sorry, we got other business we gotta do.
All right. Have a nice night.
Okay, Rose submitted minutes of, she distributed minutes of October 26th, November 10th, November 30th, and December 8th. Did anyone get a chance to review them?
I did review them. One of them I had comments on, and the other three I did not. I sent those in to Rose. So I think that was the minutes of the 26th, whichever one it is. It was one of them. I copied the board. So my recommendation is to approve the minutes as reflecting my comments.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, now we're gonna continue probably to approximately 9 o'clock or so, Pat, see how far we get, on the, discussion on the master plan. Pat, I think we left off page 93?
Yep. So, that we finished up the auto stuff, so. 1994. And short-term rentals.
Short term, yep.
So this is a provision that's establishing these permissible special permits use. It's allowable in every zoning district. So
Now that we're creating multiple zoning districts, do we want Airbnb short-term rentals in every zoning district in the community? That's the question. What's proposed is it's allowable in all the residential zones. So we're talking about Airbnbs.
I mean, if we have a lake community, and if the lake is a jewel, and if we want to bring people into our town, would we entertain Airbnbs? I mean, it's, on paper, it's a perfect place to have Airbnbs, a summer cottage, summer whatever. If we do that, we should, would bring tourism, would bring people in.
Yep.
We should have a discussion on it.
The restrictions that are proposed are fairly rigorous. They limit the number of bedrooms in the facility. They have a lot of controls, length of stay, for example. So these are pretty good controls. I thought the only issue was, do we want to permit it in every zoning district? That was the only question.
So just following, Craig, your comment, the other side of the coin with the lake communities is that a proliferation of short-term rentals is likely to intensify traffic on the lakes, which the town ought to think about and consider.
Yeah.
So we just have a discussion, so we're on 94, Anthony, talking about short-term rentals, and I was using one of your lines in the sense that
You can hear better.
the lake is our jewel, we want to bring people in, we want to increase tourism, and if we control the property, should we think about Airbnb in some areas, lake areas, for instance?
So the issue, the adverse issue associated with Airbnbs is that you have bachelor parties.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
They're noisy, and there's bands associated with whoever rents it.
I'm not
for-
saying I'm pro or for, by the way.
I'm just
I wanna
saying, so
put it
that
out there
it's
to
not
discuss.
always just a good family having a vacation on the lake. Sometimes they are, and they are particularly used aggressively for those sorts of things. A group of people spend a weekend and they raise hell, so.
We have Airbnbs here now,
We
correct?
do.
We have a few in Cold Spring, a few, well, probably plenty in Cold
Few in
Spring.
Mahopac and Carmel.
Two in Mahopac, Carmel?
Few.
Few.
Yeah, you'd be surprised, and they pop up all the time. Mike doesn't know about half of them. And go to Verbo or some of those, you'll see probably some in your neighborhood.
That's what I was
You
gonna
won't
say, I
even
mean,
know.
how could Mike know?
He does.
I mean, if I decide to turn my house into, how's
We
he gonna know?
would, it's very unlikely we
I
would
wouldn't
know.
look undesirable.
If your,
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
if your house remains a one-family dwelling, and you're renting it to one family,
It just seems, in the lake communities, it just seems a contradiction to an effort to reduce traffic.
It does
You know,
not
when you
reduce
thi-
traffic. It increases traffic generally, because instead of a resident, it's people coming in and going out.
And you think about, you know, the waterfront regulations about not, only the owner occupant can use the dock.
Right, that's a great
How-
point.
How does that work here?
For,
Because
right,
they're
a
not the owner
renter
occupant.
would
Yeah,
have no.
no ability to use the dock.
Couldn't use the boat. Exactly right. So, again, this is you need to have this conversation. So it's a reality. If you go to any vacation community, lots and lots of Airbnbs exist in the communities these days. It's a new thing, and it's prevalent. So do we want it? Don't we want it?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, but for the Airbnbs too, we don't get any
So there's
tax,
no,
nothing.
right, so we
So
don't
the
get
county gets
hotel
nothing,
tax,
right?
there's no hotel tax that we generate from that, so no.
Probably increased use of services.
Probably
We're no
right.
longer a
Yeah, the
vacation
gar- yeah,
community.
A lot of recycling comes out, a lot of beer bottles come out on a Sunday.
Garbage,
afternoon.
water, sewage.
That lake is here for us.
Yeah, I bet you there's more.
George Coyle, I'm not George, what was his name? That was
Yeah,
on the board.
Yeah,
Pat, I also had comment on, specifically on B and C. The wording is just, this is on page 94.
Yep.
The wording is just a little bit weird. When you read B, it talks about short-term rental being permitted as an accessory to an owner-occupied, single-family detached dwelling. And then when you read the second sentence, it makes it sound like the only way you can do a short-term rental is to have a second building on the property.
yeah.
And that would seem to not allow the entire house to be rented as
So
a
that's,
short-term.
I think you're right, Bob, I don't think this is very clear. So when this phenomenon originated, people rented a bedroom in the house.
Yeah.
Right, and you lived with the family,
Right.
and it was weird. Now, nobody lives in those buildings, it's it's basically a hotel. The house is, it's maintained by a landscape, or a housekeeping service, nobody lives there, it's just rented to guests. And by the way, it's a really profitable business, by the way. For a weekend, you make a month's mortgage payment. If you rent it in a month, you're paying your yearly mortgage payments on these buildings. So it's really quite profitable. So it will be more prevalent, there's no doubt about it. This language is confusing, to your point. So I think they have to clarify that language, should we want to keep it in there.
So just on the point I made before about we don't get any revenue from it, this is probably not our responsibility, but is there a way that the county can then start to say, you've got this, but now you've got to pay X amount? I
So
mean,
it's
is there
interesting,
anything that we
and
do?
I think good point. Don't know the answer to that. And I think it's probably hard to do that. That's why they haven't done it already, as opposed to a hotel tax when you know, Marriott's dealing with that.
What you do get is you get an increase in sales tax, because
Yeah, I
everyone
mean,
that does
it's
Airbnb
spending-
is going to the
people are
local
spending money in the
restaurants and
community.
coffee shops and pizzas.
That's-
I'm not saying I'm in favor of it, by the way. I'm just
so-
saying it does bring revenue, it brings a lot of revenue to the town because of sales tax.
And if an underlying premise of our comprehensive plan is one of our economic strength is tourism, it's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just,
You just
gotta-
worry about it getting out of control.
well, to Bob's point, as the protector of the lakes, if people are covetous of their privacy on the lakes, this is gonna undermine that condition.
It's kind of, I know Bob said, I remember repeating it, but it's contradictory to everything we've been hearing at all these meetings, when we come to these, the town meetings, and 95% of the comments from the people that are attending these are, the lake's too crowded, whether it is or isn't is a different story, or, you know, too many kayakers.
There's too many people.
And typically, renters don't care for the lake, it's like renting a car,
Yeah, yeah,
rent a
of
car,
course.
right?
Right.
So I think we need to have the bigger discussion as to what we feel is right for a community.
So, again, we don't have to make a decision tonight. This is one, put a pin on it, let's sleep on it, think about it. I don't know if there's an obvious answer for this.
Well, is the, you know, is the primary comment that the town board needs to reconcile this section with all the policy
exactly.
sections, policies woven into the waterfront?
Pat, would you like everyone to send you an email on their feedback within a week on short-term rentals?
That would be helpful.
Would that help you?
Sure.
Is that?
And if there's no consensus, there's no consensus.
We're giving out homework assignments for the first time.
Yeah.
Can everyone give their opinion to Pat on short-term rentals? Because I'm not sure what the,
Maybe I'm,
page 94. Thanks for
maybe
giving
I'm
good night.
missing the overall concept of Airbnb, but as I reread this,
Yeah.
so this section is basically saying that the owner has to be there and occupy the residence while the guests are there.
That's
So,
what I
That's-
pointed
yeah,
out.
so you're not renting out the entire house and it turns into a,
But this is antiquated language. That's not what
Yeah,
short-term rentals are.
that's not what's going to generate revenue for the community.
Yeah.
People aren't gonna do that now because you rent the whole house and the owner's not there these days. That's common.
Right.
So I'm not going there and hanging out with the Smiths.
Right.
You know, so that's not gonna be a very popular site.
yeah,
You know,
so I think to your point that, yeah, it's gotta be cleaned up,
Yeah.
if we go.
It's either one way or the other.
Yeah,
It's-
okay.
At the time, we were having a problem with two of them in town. So
Now,
we
those,
asked for help, like, what do other towns do? And I guess that's how it ended up in here.
the ones you had a problem with, are they owner occupied?
No.
They just rent out the whole house?
Bought a house and rent it for
Gotcha.
wedding parties, after parties,
Well, you could see the slippery slope it could be for houses on the lake especially, so.
anywhere. This isn't even near a lake, but it doesn't matter because they're neighbors and one of them had a DJ one night
Oh, jeez.
So,
till
yeah.
3 in the morning apparently.
So the provisions they've added are extensive. So there's 17 conditions. One of them is that there's a good neighbor emergency brochure to be, I mean, they really tried to address the concerns we're talking about right now. So regardless of how we come down on this, they've given us pretty deep, other than the confusion about the ownership piece, pretty strong provisions here. Okay, so you got homework on that one. Clubs is the next one. So the concern that I had with clubs, I didn't have a concern with clubs. The issue we're having with the club is that we're having a club that's claiming economic insolvency and saying we have to build residences on our club. I don't know that that affects the special permit criteria in any way.
Do we have that?
Hmm?
Where do we have that?
No, I'm saying Centennial is claiming
okay.
they can't be a club anymore.
But they divided a lot off, so it's
Yep.
a little different.
So again, I don't think the provisions are problematic in any way. I think they're very similar to what we have today. 15636, so this is 97. So I'm confused by this one. It's commercial corridor uses in residential zones.
Exactly.
So didn't we rezone the commercial corridors to be those separate commercial districts? So there shouldn't be commercial corridors in residential zones anymore. So I'm simply confused about this.
I'm in a different position. I'm not confused, I'm objecting it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
to
was
it.
thinking we should strike this.
I'm looking at B, the following uses shall be allowed within existing residential building, which may be converted subject to requirements. And it talks about offices, workshops, antique shops, art. You're gonna turn a residential zone
Into an
into a
office
commercial
building.
zone.
Yeah, this problematic to me as well.
Strike it.
Yep.
Does that tie into like mixed use though?
I'm not sure what this is intended to do. Again, because they took all the time and effort to create those different zones.
Right. So
Why undermine it with a
diligent-
provision like
exactly.
this?
Not,
Mom and pop shops.
is that what?
But it doesn't say.
No,
that.
I know, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, but I think that that's what their thought was, like a smooth transition into from the commercial to the residential, some of these smaller shops.
So if that's their intention, that should be addressed in the accessory use provisions in the residential zones, not this
Yeah, that would
condominium
be-
thing. which
Or
I think is-
conditional,
or-
and make
or
it, give it the 6 conditions, as long as you're within this, and you're
Yep.
only doing this much. or
Yep, you don't
whatever.
have employees or whatever it
Correct.
might be. Craft beverage establishment, love it.
I've got a problem.
where
I
you
mean,
are.
I love craft beverage establishments, but section C on the top of 98 suggests that it's going to be in a
Any
residential
residential.
zoning district.
Yep. So that's, I agree with that, that's a nope. We want that where it's supposed to be in commercial zones. More than that, we want to, I think, sort of target that to our hamlet areas where we want that kind of vibrant activity to be occurring. One of these separated, separate in the edge of a district doesn't really help things. I kind of want it in the heart of stuff.
So we're gonna suggest that they just remove C.
Yep.
By the lake, maybe?
Yeah.
Which one was that?
C.
That's
It's in a
page
residential
98,
zone.
second paragraph.
156, 36, 7C.
Why we want craft beverage in a residential zone?
So again,
Well, we
why,
know some
it
people
should
think
not
about
be
it, yeah.
allowed in a residential zone. And this is, if it is in a residential zone, you have to have these criteria. I think it
Makes no sense.
doesn't need, we don't want it in there. 156-36-8, Cultural and Performing Arts Center, I love that, that's great. Should you come into our community, more power to you.
Do we, in light of the other comments we've been making, do we need to delineate that it has to be in certain zones?
So exactly right. So remember, there's a table of uses and where they're permitted and not permitted in the various zoning districts. So I don't remember where this was permitted offhand.
I think in the gate, one of the gateways into our community, I think it's permitted.
So I'm assuming it's in that open space, well, maybe not. It's not.
I guess.
It's not in neighborhood retail. It's not in,
I thought it was residential.
it's not in SMR, it's not in hospital.
Should there be an overall comment to all of these that they need to delineate where they are permitted?
Yeah, they are. So
They are in
this
the-
table,
But it's not covering. I mean,
it's not, much.
You know,
So it doesn't
daycares,
say it here, you're right. So
day camps, daycares, I think.
But it
you're
doesn't
in the
usually
same
either
issue.
in our existing one, to be honest.
that's,
Our existing code has a zoning table, and then it refers you to the code. It's not the other way. The code doesn't say which zone you're permitted
so this
in.
is consistent
Generally.
with the typical drafting of our type of code. It's one way or the other. So it's either the table, and then the narrative doesn't say it specifically, or it's all in the narrative, and you don't have a table. So we come across cultural, and it'll say it's permitted in these zones.
I personally prefer a table.
Table's fine as long as there's no inconsistency.
Yep.
Correct,
Yep.
correct. It's just, it's easier for me to have a table on the wall. I can look up at it and tell people when they're calling in with questions.
Next one is day camps. Kiwi, I think this is the same
That's it.
language we have today.
That is our language.
Yep. Daycare centers and day nurseries,
Different than nursery schools,
different than nursery schools, different license from the state, that's why it's called out differently.
different location it's permitted.
Yep. And again, good standards, most of these standards also correspond to the state licensing standards, so there's a correlation at least between those. Design shopping centers is the next one.
We have that.
So what?
Pat, I had a note here, and I was just trying to find, so I just wrote here, not defined, day camps. Should we provide a definition of what a day camp is?
We do, there is. Page 11, any camp defined in this chapter offering daycare or instruction.
Where is that?
The definition section, page 11. Right.
Oh, up front.
I'll just read it again. Any camp is defined in this chapter.
I missed it then, sorry.
Offering daycare or instruction for adults or children and not qualifying as a private educational institution or day nursery. So
'Cause they put
basically, the
a camp
definition of a
day.
day camp is any day camp.
And the only reason I
That's
knew
why
that,
it
that's
couldn't
how
find it.
our code is now.
Yeah. So,
All
not so-
right,
not
I'll
so
cross off my not defined.
So design shopping center, I'm just trying to see what zoning districts we have that in. New zoning districts, neighborhood retail,
It would be the bigger commercial,
yeah.
because it requires the larger lot. And it's based on population. On-site parking sign, kind of sign.
Mixed use, no. Neighborhood business, no. Core business, no. Town commercial. And then plan and rent. So this is, I had this problem before, so I can't find where this use is established in these, is permissible, what zone it's in, so. So we have, this is a layover, right? We have design shopping center now, yes?
Yes.
So,
Right now, it's permitted in the commercial zone.
so I don't see where it's permitted in the future, so we gotta clarify that.
Can we, refresh my memory, where did we close, I'm jumping back, but did we close on signage? Didn't we, that's a tough one to close on,
So,
right?
yeah, we
We didn't get there yet.
We didn't get there yet.
Okay,
That's a whole nother
Okay.
section, and
because that's gonna take some work.
no doubt, that's probably one of the biggest sections of the code,
Okay, good.
candidly. I think that's a whole session, frankly, just dealing with signs.
We won't
And
start,
we
we
really
won't
need
start
Mike
that tonight.
on that one.
Yeah.
Somebody else?
It's important. Drive-through facility, we should look at this carefully. So we've wrestled with these a couple of times with applications we've had. So again, a drive-through facility is a defined use, so that's good. We have the definition. Entrances are exits. So I'm going through this with you live right now. The drive-through has to be attached to the principal building. So that's an interesting thing. So, been to a Chick-fil-A recently?
Well, number 8, we'd have to get rid of,
Never.
or we gotta close McDonald's down.
Well, so even before we get there, so the Chick-fil-A, which has gone ballistic all over the place, if you've ever seen them or been past them, there's 100 vehicles at the drive-through section every time. They take the orders with people in the lot. It's not, you don't take the order at a, yeah, the guy comes out with an iPad and
They're
takes your
really
order in
efficient.
your car. So that may be a conflict with what this is. I think because Chick-fil-A has been so unbelievably successful, because of their customer service, you're gonna see that with everything. It's gonna be at McDonald's within a year and so forth. So I think we have to be aware of that for the drive-through facilities, just because of the success of Chick-fil-A.
Until someone gets run over.
I think they only do it when their queue builds up, though,
So
isn't
I'm,
it?
so I don't
No,
know
no,
about that. So
Some-
I see them
some
out there
do, Mike.
all the time.
Some restaurants do it when their queue builds up, they'll send
We're
people out there.
absolutely right, but the
Popeyes does
Chick-fil-A,
that on
I see them out there in the
202.
pouring rain doing it, so that I think it's a normal protocol to catch people in the parking lot as opposed. So my point simply is, they're saying it must be attached to the building. I think that's not always the case these days, so we may want to think about that provision.
Doesn't there always need to be an exit? Meaning if you're on the line, you need to be able to get off the line.
So that's the other thing, absolutely.
You forgot your
The
wallet, you're online,
bypass-
you know.
Yep, we had a problem with that with McDonald's, if you remember, when
Yeah.
they redid that. Creating the bypass was a challenge, because they didn't
Bypass,
have
that's
enough
the word,
room. But they were able to do it by losing parking spaces, I think, on the inbound part of it,
Dunkin' Donuts doesn't have it.
and they
Sure
should.
don't. Yeah, they don't. Yeah, right.
You're right.
Shared use of driveways should be encouraged. I'm not sure what they're trying to get at with respect to that.
So Pat, we should ask for a bypass though, right?
Absolutely,
Emergency services, if nothing else.
yep, for sure, and I don't want to wait on the line anymore.
Yeah.
I changed my mind.
You know,
I don't-
honestly, Dunkin' Donuts, you go, it's faster going to get your coffee and
Oh,
come
for
out than
sure.
it is to wait on the line.
The experience, again, COVID is COVID, but the experience of COVID, if you went to a Starbucks during COVID, it was insane. Lines were out onto the highways for a lot of these facilities. Shared use of driveways should be encouraged. I'm not sure what they're trying to get at with respect to that, but if they're saying if there's multiple tenants in the building, you should be sharing a driveway. You know, the Dunkin' Donuts needed all of that driveway. If they're sharing it with somebody else, you're eliminating the volume, you're limiting the volume on the driveway, so I'm just not sure.
And what does that have to do with the drive-through?
That's what I'm getting at. I don't know what the provision is intended to mean, so.
And I think something like that can only potentially cause problems down the road, because somebody will have a unique situation, will say, oh, but we're sharing a driveway.
Right.
Yeah, I can't even think of what it would be, but
Needs to be accessory and incidental to the allowable use. Love that, that's correct. Drive-through window, access queuing lane, and other related elements shall be located behind the building and screened from view from any public right-of-way. So we should think about that again. What does that mean for the Chick-fil-A guy that's catching you in front of the building before you go around the side to pick up your stuff? It doesn't necessarily happen in the back. I think that might be a little antiquated. Most of the drive-through windows are on the side of the building, not the back.
Yeah.
You just, either you order here, you go around the back and you pick it up on the other side. That's McDonald's.
What about the ones that are in the middle of a parking lot? Where's the back?
Yeah, that's, yeah, exactly right.
You know, if you have it in McDonald's and Mahopac, where's the back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The back is what faces A&P, actually. No, technically, it's what faces A&P, because your front is always facing the road.
Yeah.
So that's a hard one. Because they could just put a door on a different side of a building and make something else at the back.
True.
Number 5, they have to give us a stacking analysis. Love that.
Yep.
We absolutely need that. You can't have people out on the street waiting to get into these things.
We always call it a queue,
Yep.
the queuing analysis.
Yep. Landscaping to screen the parking areas, that's good. So speakers and stuff, that's, can't be audible beyond the property line, that's often an issue and a concern. Drive-through window and lanes should not to require pedestrians to cross the drive-through traffic. That's something we've dealt with a bunch of times, and I think we dealt with it at McDonald's. It's hard to deal with, and you shouldn't be walking through the drive-through line necessarily because you're dodging knuckleheads who are ordering on their phone now and whatever it is, so I like that.
Eating their fries.
Eating their fries, that's right. The next one is a big one, dwellings in the hamlet mixed centers. So this is what we want. We've been talking about this for years. Craig, you've been acknowledging this for the applications that Joel's been getting variances for. So this is something we want to accommodate.
Can we do something with the affordable on this?
We certainly can. So affordable's a bigger issue. So, you know, the governor
Yes.
issued.
I sent that an email to everybody.
Yeah, and her approach is surprising to me because she's saying we're gonna have this mandate. There wasn't a lot of buy-in. She knew what happened last year with the accessory apartment and TOD zoning. It got blown out of the water because all the community said, you're not telling us what to do. And this year she comes back again and says, this is what I'm telling you what we're gonna do. They're good initiatives, but to say it's going to be a state mandate is a problem. So, for example, our affordable housing issue, as you know, we don't have a local law, but we have some affordable housing in the community. Do we get credit for that? Or if this mandate is applied, is it on top of what we've already done? So we'll see how this comes about, if it ever comes about. But it would affect our multiple dwellings in our hamlet centers, there's no question about it. And whether or not we can consider them transit-oriented. We don't have a train station, but we have public transit in our hamlet areas, for whatever it's worth, not a heck of a lot, but it's there. So does that mandate now apply, that we must achieve these certain state-regulated goals? Don't know. So that's a separate issue to deal with, and I don't know that we need to address it in the comprehensive plan because it's not yet law, and who knows if it's going to be law. But that's just another thing on the horizon that just emerged 2 days ago, and we need to keep an eye on it. There's no question about it. So let's go through this because this is a biggie. So within the hamlet zones, single-family attached and multi-family dwelling are allowed by special permit. So again, part of our objective has been to make it easy to do some of these things. So Is it necessary to have a multifamily building in a hamlet center as a special permit use that requires a separate approval, or is it as of right permitted use? Again, if I'm a developer, I'm trying to find the course of least resistance. Whether or not I can comply with these standards, it's still another approval you have to grant, and it represents something of an obstacle.
Special use permits have to go to the town board, right?
No, so
No.
that's what we're dealing with now. All of these uses are special permit, and as we started the evening with, they've assigned them to you.
So then why do,
Yeah, what's the difference between what we do now and what
that,
we would
so
be doing then?
why does it be special use?
What's
Why-
the,
It would be two approvals at the same time anyway. If
So,
it's-
so think about that property that was up in the Carmel Hamlet, nice big Victorian building. I think law firm was.
Yeah,
was
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that one, they had to come to us because it was a special permit, right?
And it was a prohibited use. That
they
was
got a
the
use
issue.
variance.
That was a use variance. That use is not allowed currently. So now we're saying that it's allowable only as a special permit. So they need a use variance.
So if they didn't have to come to us for approval, do we think that that would have turned out okay?
No, so they would still need site plan approval from you.
That's correct.
So you still
Okay.
have your bite at it.
Okay.
It's just, you would then have to also say, and the use is permitted in this building. That's the
Okay.
special
But
permit.
doesn't this, but, go ahead, Bob, you still.
No, no, that.
But the
that
special
clarifies.
use just makes it more difficult, slower and more expensive for our applicants, which we are, because of our nature, slow and expensive to do business with anyway, so.
Yeah.
I
If
don't
we
see
do
the
our-
difference, honestly.
If we do a due diligence, as I believe we do in all applications, can't we just scratch special use permit?
That's the point. So Mike's
Yeah.
point is,
Yeah, I
what's
agree
the
with Mike.
difference? It'll be the same night, the same appearance before the same,
Right.
your
Right.
board, the same public hearing.
I think Mike's
But
right.
it says there's more
Another-
stuff to do.
Another layer.
Yeah. there's
Let's
another-
eliminate layers.
Yeah, that's not good.
Agreed.
So again, I think we can simply go back to the town board with this and say, why does it have to be a special permit use? And simply ask the question, not necessarily oppose it, but say, why does it have to be a special permit?
Or maybe they could explain what they mean by it. Maybe they
Yeah.
mean something different where a special use permit can be taken away. You
Is
know,
there an
maybe it's something
instance
like
where
that.
you would not want to see something, multifamily units above a commercial use in the hamlet centers? I can't imagine an instance where you wouldn't want to see that.
If there is a situation, it would probably be something relating to safety or location, and that you'd get
So
at
here's,
through
one
the
other-
site plan,
so
right?
let me raise, Bob, another point. So a permissive, an as-of-right permitted use, you have some discretion in there to say no occasionally. A special permit, if I meet these criteria, you can't say no. So in a way, you're actually limiting your discretion with a special permit. If I meet the standards, you can't say no, you
Yeah.
have to say yes.
So then it's
So-
better for the developer.
So conceive, I love it if I'm representing an applicant to be a special permit use.
If I meet your 7 criteria, you can't say no, that's better for them.
Yeah, but it's an extra process, it's an extra fee, it's sometimes a different board. Ordinarily, the special permits go to different boards. In this case, I think so it may be clever on the part of Nelson Pope to give you that authority as well. I think their thought is, to Mike's point, it's not lengthening the process.
They do
You're
them the
before
same
you
time.
anyway, it's like you do seeker. One resolution for that, one resolution for site plan, and then you'd also have a special permit resolution.
So if we left, because we didn't foresee every circumstance, if we left some standard, if we left it as is, but we unforeseeingly left some standard out of here, we would not be able to come to that
Impose it, right.
realization and apply it at that point?
Yeah, you couldn't, you can't make it up, you can't wing it, the special permit standards, they are.
You could
what they are.
request it, you can't require it.
But without the special permit, it's part of your site plan review, you just, can you do this, can you do that? Would you do this, would you do that? You have that authority. So I think, without belaboring this, go back to, we'll just say to the town board, why is it being done this way? What if it were
Agreed.
permitted as of right use?
So are we proposing that they just do away with 15636.13?
For that particular use, so an apartment building, apartments above would be a permitted use as of right, instead of a special.
So the only thing I would say then is if they don't, then we have to focus on D because it speaks specifically to 2.5 stories, 3 stories, so whatever we decide on ultimately should be consistent.
Before we get there, Ray, so B,
Oh, sorry.
if you have lake frontage, you can't have this. there are no, if you're not located in the mixed center zone, and you have lake frontage on which a lot or any portion thereof is within 100 feet of mean high water, shall be developed with dwellings, including dwellings above ground floor, shall not. No lot in those zones, so shall not. So, this is saying again we have properties in the hamlet that are on the waterfront within 100 feet. This is saying you couldn't have apartments above.
It
Again,
doesn't,
They don't
does
want you
it
blocking
say
the view.
that? It says,
no
the planning
lot.
board is not authorized to waive this provision in any such application requesting dwellings on a lot with lake frontage, blah, 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 shall require a use variance. That doesn't mean you can't get one.
Right, right.
But you're not just going for an area variance, you're
It's a
actually
use
asking for a
variance.
use variance.
So we give out use variances like lollipops. You should never get a use variance. The standard for use variance is very, very high. So I'm always astonished that our zoning board grants use variances, so it's a challenge. So this is saying, I want to go back to the underlying premise. Why don't we want a multifamily building on the waterfront?
Why
So-
don't we, or why do we?
Why don't
So
we?
Lakeland
Oh,
Island,
I can answer that.
So,
Because it proliferates.
in the Hamlet Center, we're talking about the Hamlet Center zone.
So you
right
think
over
about,
there,
so the Hamlet Center has condominium complex right on the water.
Yep.
Would you like to see
more of that.
more of that? And to me, the answer is no.
Then that's what this provision is saying, exactly that.
so
Do you have consensus?
Lakeland Ida, right? So where the dress shop just went in,
Yeah, yeah,
that we
yeah.
approved, and the whole strip of stores there, Delicatessen, I think there's an exercise
That would
facility.
be within 100 feet.
So you're saying that those people could
You
not
could not
have,
have apartments above without getting a use variance.
I don't know, I mean, what's the harm in them having an apartment above? I mean, we're saying.
Ask him.
we're-
Ask him.
But we're
Well,
saying,
but do you want another row of Swan Cove condominiums right next door to, between, where the marina?
We're talking two different things.
yeah, I'm talking about,
Talking new
we're saying
development as opposed to-
we're encouraging apartments above retail. To me,
In the
that strip
hamlets.
that I'm mentioning has.
Which is the edge of the
business on the bottom.
Carmel Hamlet.
And retail above, and I was saying you could do that all through the whole Putnam County, but you can't do it if you have water view?
That's what this is saying.
But I think
I think that's different what Bob's saying about the condos.
But I think you're talking about pre-existing, he's talking about
Yeah,
new,
we're talking
right?
two different, we're talking new
I think we're talking
construction
apples and
versus-
oranges.
No, not necessarily, it's either way. So
I'm
whether you
just-
No, I know,
rebuild
but
the
I
building-
think that's what, because you were talking about the dress shop and.
Right.
Yeah.
My issue is waterfront, I mean, we have whole sections in the comprehensive plan about
Views.
enhancing view sheds and not parallel to the waterfront and all this stuff, and just building up another 2 stories just seems contradictory to that, right on the lake.
This is just saying that you can do dwellings in the Hamlet Mixed-Use Center.
Just those 2 areas, Mahopac and Carmel, those 2
Dwellings.
designated areas.
Period.
Okay, I'm not
What's been
following your
tagged
point.
mixed
But
use?
this is saying,
Dwellings. We're not seeing in the mixed-use buildings.
but.
It's the mixed-use center zone, correct?
B talks about lake frontage, that's what's gotten us.
Correct. Yeah. But you can't pick and choose, that's,
Right.
So
if you go into the town of Carmel, where those businesses are,
Yep.
there's probably some apartments upstairs there now, right?
Don't know if
Yes,
that's
there are.
100 feet from the lake, though. Maybe that's more
Yeah,
than
so
100
it's the
feet.
lake, so I guess I'm stuck on why are they saying lake?
View sheds.
I think view sheds. So they should
So maybe when you're
consistent
building new, okay, when you're building new. I'm
It doesn't
thinking
say that,
existing.
though. It says dwellings, including dwellings above ground. It doesn't say new construction, so it could be the renovation of existing
Existing
buildings.
doesn't say, yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
If you're an existing building and you're just converting what is currently a second floor into a multifamily, so it's a 2-family house where it was a 1-family house, think about those old Victorian houses,
Right,
it's
right.
fairly common. That's not my concern.
Okay,
My
your
concern
concern-
is multifamily dwellings of a larger nature proliferating around the waterfront.
Running
That's
parallel
what
with
I'm
the water.
concerned.
Yeah, so we have 2 different things. Okay.
So if somebody wanted to build a restaurant in that same spot that they're allowed to build, you wouldn't want that either?
Well, we
If it
have
was
the view
two-story-
shed requirements.
Two-story, no, but a 2-story restaurant.
No, but we have the view shed provisions elsewhere in the code.
If they want to build a two-story restaurant, they can. They got 35 feet, they can.
I'm just saying, there's a whole section prior to this on view sheds. And if you can, we went through that, and if you can comply with that, that's fine.
Correct, but I think that they're allowed 35 feet on a restaurant, correct?
So in the H, I don't remember.
We don't have much lake frontage available anyway.
I mean, I would welcome any restaurant being built on a lakefront.
We would what? Vote for it?
Where?
No, I'm just saying, but if that.
No, to your
we're-
point, Mike,
We're talking
I-
about view sheds, and we're saying, I'm trying to figure out if there's how we can make, you know what I mean? Because somebody's gonna eventually come in and wanna do a restaurant. We know, hopefully, that's
I
the,
think we started getting to the point, which I think I'm alluding to. So an existing building, probably fine. Who cares what's in the space above? The volume of the building already exists.
doesn't change.
What
correct?
Bob's saying is like a three-story condominium, that you're not gonna see that water for the 500 feet it's gonna run the shorefront.
I agree with
I-
that. I mean, so here, so in the Four Brothers parking lot, right, Four Brothers owns that, John owns that property there.
Yep.
So if he said, I don't need this big parking lot, I'm gonna put up some condos right there.
Yeah.
That would be blocking the view shed, we would not want
But
that.
they're over 100 feet from the lake, so they wouldn't fall here.
Maybe some of them would be within 100 feet, maybe.
Uh,
But that's the point. So
but,
maybe it's
yeah.
new construction, it's a number of units, maybe. If it's more than 3 units or something, it would be prohibited. So maybe we go back to them with that, which we're okay with existing buildings, but new stuff, somehow you define that, we have a problem
Would
with
we care, the examples help me, would we care if Nancy, who owns where Cafe Piccolo is, business is dying, business is not good, there's all those second floor stories, if they, not any higher, but they converted some of those to apartments upstairs, would we care about that?
No, I don't think
that.
so.
Not, okay,
It's
that's
the same-
existing
same
buildings.
So that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
It
The problem
doesn't
is
doesn't
that,
change anything.
because some of
Right.
those businesses, quite frankly, I think are struggling, right?
For sure.
You got a kitchen store down there, you got Cafe
We've said all
Piccolo,
along.
upstairs they have little offices or whatever, but they would do better, right? They would do better as apartments.
Absolutely.
And then guess what? All those people in those apartments would come into town and do business.
You got it.
So we would not,
that's the
that's where
formula.
I'm,
I don't disagree with that.
So,
Okay.
yeah, that's the formula we've seized upon.
I
To
agree
Bob's
with
point,
that,
we've
yeah.
also superimposed on that a thing that we like views of the lake. So you can't build
Right.
something to block, something new
So,
to block those.
it's good to
So
use
that's a good
examples.
point, and I think we can convey that to the
This
town.
allows 12 units per acre. It's a lot of units.
That's a lot of units. So that goes to the point, the new construction thing.
Yeah.
So it already has the number in there.
That's 4 units, 3 high.
That'll block that whole lake up, you won't even see it.
Well,
So-
you have to assume
It's bad
that
enough you
unless
can't
it's
get on it, but at
prohibited,
least you wanna
every
be able to look at
inch
it.
of property
Would
around
be
that
sooner
lake
or
will
later.
be
I'd
developed.
rather not see it if I can't use it.
So
I don't care,
B
you can't get
takes
on it.
care of that. The rest of these go to areas that are more than 100 feet away from the waterfront, so it's just the hamlets. So the primary objective, enliven the area, that's all good. Building height, here's again our building height discussion, so 2.5 stories.
we closed on 3 though, we all.
Yep, and shall be 3 stories for multifamily buildings. So this gives you the 3 stories for the
Right.
multifamily buildings. It's inconsistent in the zoning, we've clarified that.
On the lake too?
So no, again, it's gotta be pre-existing, you can't build a new building on the lake based on our recommendation. And they've added 35 feet here as an addition. Dwelling size, 650s are normal, minimum size, 1,200 square feet for a single-family home. First, so I'm not thrilled about this language about single-family homes, calling it out in the Hamlet Center. So I don't want a single-family home in the middle of the Hamlet Center. Our code is hierarchical, so it allows lower intensity uses in the higher intensity zones. So I don't think we have to call it out, it's implicit in the code. But I don't want somebody tearing down a commercial building and building a single-family home in the middle of
No.
the Hamlet Centers.
No.
So they're just emphasizing that, I don't think it needs to be emphasized. It's not illegal to do that now, and it wouldn't be under our code. You're.
No, I agree, that's what
Yeah.
I don't like to tell people, because if you buy a 10-acre piece of commercial land, you can put almost 10 houses on it. Where you buy a 10-acre piece of residential land, you could only put 3 houses on it.
Yeah,
But now everybody knows.
that's right, there's a camera right there. Residential density, that's the 8-unit thing we just talked about, so again, so absent the waterfront property, we're talking about 8 units for an acre. That's again, single family, 12 for multifamily. That's the density we're talking about. 12 unit per acre. That's not a particularly dense density for a commercial district. It's a lot of units, but in a commercial zone, that's not crazy. You know, there are 20, 30, 40 units per acre in certain commercial zones, so 12 units is a multifamily, is a economically viable multifamily density, I would say. So I think they hit on a reasonable number for us. Parking, not permitted in any front yard. Buildings shall be situated to the building's front on the existing town roads, access via an alley or driveway. So typically, on the commercial areas, we beat this into our applicants all the time, put the parking behind the buildings, so it's not the first thing you see. We don't want parking lots to be the visible thing, we want a nice building to be the visible thing. I think we could emphasize that a little bit better, perhaps in this language. Utilities go underground. And the architectural review, again, I'm not sure why it says that. They shall be subject to architectural review in accordance with the requirements for the DO zone. And what, remind me what the DO zone is. And this,
Overlay.
Oh, that's the overlay zone. So this is what we said before, we don't want the overlay zone,
Right.
but we want the design standards. So this should say per our design standards. On-street parking, signs, site plan illustrate internal circulation, and a market study. I like the market study provision, again, special permit uses typically have things like that. You need a market study, so at some point in time, we may not have, the markets may change so significantly, we would use that as a basis to deny yet another apartment building if we have too many apartment buildings, we've glutted the market, so to speak.
We don't want to end up with vacant.
Yep.
Of course. Do we wrap up after this section?
Yes, so, recreation area, conversion of buildings and parking. Let's just do educational uses, so I think this is the same as what we have already, educational institutions, pretty straightforward. And we have,
The only question I have here is,
Yeah.
think about the Longview School situation. Traffic and neighborhood disruption was the big issue.
it was. So what I would suggest is, as a special permit criteria, you must submit a traffic study.
That's a good example there.
Yep. And Longview is a good idea, private institution, we get funky when it's a public school, and Mike doesn't even issue building permits for school, what the schools do, so we don't grant permits or approvals, out of our control, but the private schools, those institutions, we do have control over
About
those.
proper site circulation shall be required as well, because that was,
Where
they
you
had
pick
like
up and drop
a
off.
14-foot driveway in and out, and 7 feet's not wide enough for today's cars.
It's interesting, public, oh, yeah. It's true.
We should make it that they have to have a 24-foot
Yeah.
two-way driveway,
Yeah.
because they're delivering kids there in buses, and it's,
School enrollment's down in so many states, I think it was in Pittsburgh or something, they literally converted an old, beautiful-looking school into apartments. Gorgeous.
Yeah, yeah, school buildings offer a great opportunity for repurposing. The lesson learned was from the 70s, when we got out of school, and all the schools, populations went down, and they sold all the schools. What we're doing now, we learned the lesson, and we're converting them.
Some of our schools have views of the lake.
Yeah.
That'd be a beautiful apartment building.
Lakeview.
Yeah, Lakeview would be a beautiful condominium or apartment building.
Hastings
I do.
area, you know, the fairways.
Come on, let's take that project on.
That's true, so,
I think we're good. What's that? That'd be, all right, so we're going to continue at 105, right?
yeah.
Coming from here,
Yeah, you-
and then it's on your.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Oh, I know.
Second.
I know.
All in favor?
It
Good
was,
night, everybody.
convent, yeah.